Hello, Simon Forrest here from extractingtherichness.com. In February and March 2019, Maureen and I spent 5 weeks travelling the length, breadth and width of Tasmania. In this multi-part mini-series, we'll show you what we did, where we went and the people we met. Up early on February the 11th, coincidentally Maureen's birthday, packing the camper trailer in the dark for the first time because we have to be at the Port of Melbourne early to catch the ferry. We pull into Girdlestone Park. It's cold, wet, dark. We have to back the camper trailer up a grassy, slippery slope. It rains all night and blows a gale. Things get better from here. We have an ordinary breakfast at a local cafe, which is made worse by the fact that we soon discover the House of Ambers, a chocolate making place which serves beautiful breakfasts. From there, it's off to the Axeman's Hall of Fame and then to Sherwood Hall, and already Tasmania is starting to show its natural beauty. And then to Mole Creek Caravan Park, where we leave our camper trailer and head out to Maracoopa Cave, which ends the day. The next day, we're off to Trawana Wildlife Sanctuary, which is all about Tasmanian devils and wombats. Who thought Tasmanian devils could be so cute? And then it's down to Deloraine, where we see a world-class exhibition of silkwork. We leave Mole Creek Caravan Park the next morning and travel to Roosevelt, where we get our first look at the Tamar River. Then it's on to the Beaconsfield mine and the disaster that happened there, Platypus House, where we see both platypus and echidna, and Seahorse World, where we see thousands of leafy sea dragons, and then it's on to Beauty Point, where we take an idyllic walk along the banks of the Tamar. In the morning, it's off to Lowhead, where the Tamar River meets Bass Strait. There's lots of turbulence in the water here, but surprisingly, very little noise. Next, we start to visit some of Tasmania's well-known wineries. The first of these being the House of Arras, followed by Clover Hill. And then it's down to Longford, where we unhitch the camper and visit Woolmer's Estate, a very traditional English residence. Swansea on the morning of Saturday the 16th, because our friends Kylie and Bridget, who live in Melbourne, have access to a beach house in Swansea, and we're going to spend the weekend with them. The four of us visit the Bay of Fires and the town of Bicheno on Sunday the 17th. Wineglass Bay, is there a prettier bay, is where we spend Monday the 18th, and then farewell Kylie and Bridget, who have to return to Melbourne. It's back to Longford for us, which we're going to use as a base to tour Launceston. And in Launceston, the first place we visit is a very old umbrella shop, followed by a tour of Bogue's Brewery. Then we discover a restaurant with a name connected to Maureen. More about that in a future episode. Then we find Chris, an amazing bloke, a real adventurer, who steers us up Cataract Gorge and says one of the places we have to visit is Cockle Creek. The delightfully pretty town of Evandale is our next destination, and on the way we visit the Tasmanian Gourmet Sauce Company, which makes the most delicious chutneys and sauces and has a sensationally renovated garden and house on the property, an absolute delight to look at. Then it's on to the town of Ross, well known for its wool products and for an intersection with some really interesting names. Look for those names in a future episode. It's also the place where we tried the famous scallop pie. And at the end of the day, we landed in Oatlands in a free park next to a windmill for a very cold night. Today, we drive through Hobart, stopping at the Stefano Lubiano winery, which has shades of Tuscany written all over it. We also stop at the Cadbury's factory, which is a waste of time since it no longer has visitors go through it. We drive on to Snug, drop our caravan at the Snug Caravan Park and travel down to have a look at Cygnet, returning to the Snug beach to have a glass of wine on the beach and talk to the locals. The next day, it's off to Hobart, where there's a small incident in the car park and the top of our four-wheel drive. More about that in a future episode. Then it's on to the Mona Ferry because we're off to Mona for the second time in our life. It's off to Hobart again today, because today is the day that the Salamanca Place market is held, and we really enjoyed that market last time we were in Tasmania. We're also going to meet Kylie again, who's flown from Melbourne this time to meet her mother and brother who are holidaying in Tasmania. It's a chance for Maureen to buy a purse from her favourite purse shop at the Hobart Market, and then we take a quick trip up Mount Wellington where, unfortunately, last time it was snowing. This time it wasn't. It's now Sunday the 24th and we drive again back to Hobart, but this time with the camper trailer behind us because we're on our way down to Port Arthur. We arrive at the Port Arthur Caravan Park and set up our camper and then drive back to Eagle Hawk Nest Historic Site and the tessellated pavement. Then on to Tasman's Arch and the Devil's Kitchen to have a good look at both those places. Then back to the caravan park for dinner. We spent a day at the Port Arthur Penal Settlement, which is a World Heritage Site. There'll be a lot more information about our day here in a future episode. Watch for that. We left Port Arthur and our next port of call was the Wooden Boat Centre at Franklin, a real highlight of the trip. There'll be more about this in a future episode and it'll be one of my favourite episodes. It was then on to Dover, where we spent the night at the Dover Caravan Park. We leave our camper trailer at Dover and head on down to Cockle Creek. This is on the advice of Chris, the bloke who steered us on the boat up Cataract Gorge. Cockle Creek is unbelievably beautiful. It's the most southerly point to which you can drive in Australia, and it's one end of the South Coast track. There'll be more about Cockle Creek in a future episode, and there we meet a really interesting bloke. I'll talk about him in that episode. We're on our way to Hobart. Yes, Hobart again, because we've decided to book a flight from Hobart to Melaleuca, and on the way we stop at Geeveston to see the Ave giant tree. More about the fact that we don't see the Ave giant tree in a future episode. It's Friday the 1st of March and we are excited. Today we're catching a plane which is going to take us out to Melaleuca and then onto a boat out to Bathurst Harbour. More about this great day in a future episode. Don't miss it. Today, the 2nd of March, we go from Hobart to Mount Field National Park. We end up staying at the Left of Field Caravan Park, which will be the subject of a future episode. A really interesting caravan park. Once we get to the caravan park, the owner says we should go and have a look at the Gordon Dam, so we do, an amazing feat of engineering, and it brings us in touch the first time with the magnificent Huon Pines. On the way home, we encounter a little bit of the bushfire. More about that later too. It's Sunday, the 3rd of March, and we're off to Mount Field, to Russell Falls, to do the Tall Trees Walk. There sure are some tall trees here. Then we go to see the Wall in the Wilderness, which will be the subject of another episode. We want to camp that night at the Derwent Bridge Hotel, but all the spots are taken. So we drive on to Queenstown, which is a bit of a tough drive, and the caravan park's full, so we stay at the Oval. This is the Queenstown Football Oval, and it's just been top dressed. So you would think grass is going to grow through it, but that's not the idea. It gets so wet here that the grass won't grow, so they play on this fine crushed gravel. It's a tough game here. We decide to drive from Queenstown to Strawn. It's Monday the 4th. Hard driving, uphill, downhill, around bend after bend after bend. The brakes on both the vehicle and the camper get quite warm. When we arrive at Strawn, we buy tickets for the railway and for the river cruise along the Gordon-Franklin River. And later in the afternoon, we board the West Coast Wilderness Railway. Up early on Tuesday the 5th because we need to be on board the boat by 8:30. We're off to the World Heritage Gordon-Franklin area. On the way we stop at Sarah Island, which was the setting for the book For the Term of His Natural Life, which depicts the harsh treatment of the convicts. At the end of the day, we watch a demonstration on the sawing of Huon pine, ironically by a nephew of one of the people involved in the process to save the Gordon Franklin. More about him later on. It's a late start on Wednesday the 6th. We're driving from Strawn to Waratah. Waratah will be the base that we'll use to explore Cradle Mountain. It's cold and wet, in fact so cold that that's hail on the windscreen. On the way we stop at Spray Tunnel, arriving at Waratah to a cold campground with no power, which means no heat. Solution: the local pub for fire and dinner. It's the day we've been waiting for. We drive to Cradle Mountain and walk around Lake Dove. It's beautiful, it's fresh, it's not raining, it's wonderful. We leave Waratah on Friday the 8th, and guess what? It's raining. We drive through beautiful rainforests again on the way to Smithton, set up our camper and make a quick visit into Stanley and then home for dinner. Driving the Tarkine is our goal for Saturday the 9th, and we're not disappointed because it's full of beautiful scenery. But one of the places we stop at first is a school trading table and stock up on morning tea treats. As we venture to the edge of the world, we're amazed at the amount of very large pieces of timber that have been washed up on the coast. This drive also gave us the opportunity to venture onto the Western Explorer Road, a road we hadn't taken when we left Waratah because of the conditions. It sure was isolated, but this Tarkine drive was a loop which led us back to Smithton and dinner. Today is the day we visit Stanley and we climb the Nut. That's quite a walk. There'll be more about that in a later episode. We have seafood lunch at Hersey's and then we go to Highfield, the base for the Van Diemen Land Company. We've continued our stay at Smithton and the next day, Monday the 11th, we visit the Big Tree. That is a monster. And then Dip Falls, more steps, and we see a waterfall, well, really a trickle. There hasn't been much rain, so it's not in full flood. Then it was on to Burnie, a town which is resurrecting itself now that its paper mill has closed. Cadale Lodge Gardens is our first destination on Tuesday the 12th. This is a personal property of an elderly couple and their two daughters, and they have done a magnificent job of both the garden and the garden architecture. After that, it was on to Leven Canyon, some more beautiful scenery, and then to Turners Beach, where we spent the night. Before we get to Turners Beach, we go through the town of Sheffield, which is famous for its murals, and there'll be more on the murals in a future episode. And then it's down to the international rowing course at Lake Barrington. This is a spectacular setting for a sporting complex. Bridport is our next stop, and it's a sensational caravan park with 2.5 kilometres of beach frontage. The next day, we head off to the Derby Tin Mine, which is no longer a working mine, but the town has resurrected itself as a centre for BMX enthusiasts. More spectacular views, this time from the Sideling Lookout. Not spectacular views in Ledgerwood, but heartbreaking memorials to the men and women of Australia who've been affected by war. More on these memorials in a later episode. And at the end of the day, to the Barnbougle Golf Club, supposedly Australia's best golf course with spectacular views of the water. We spend the day travelling from Bridport to Latrobe, and it's quite a sad day because we're really going back to Latrobe to Devonport to catch the ferry. It's the end of a wonderful 5-week holiday. Our last day we spend walking around Latrobe, having lunch at the Axman's Hall of Fame, and then to the Tasmanian Arboretum.